Well, good morning. Let's go ahead and call to order the special meeting here. If we could have the flag salute started by our own James Stewart and followed by the roll call.
Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, can we have the roll call, please?
Yes, Councilmember Alexander.
Here.
Councilmember Edwards, I do not see. Mayor Ron.
Here.
Councilmember Schwank.
Here.
Councilmember Stewart.
Here.
All right, so this meeting is a business meeting to conduct a workshop regarding surplus land and the Surplus Lands Act, an inventory of city-owned vacant parcels. And primarily it's a discussion on best use for these vacant parcels. No final action is going to be happening today. It's just a discussion and recommendations, and we want to hear from folks in the community as well about all of this. So if we could, let's get started with the report.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, there you are.
I'm over here. Good morning. Yes, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your interest in showing up today. This has been a topic that, frankly, I personally have had with many in my time working with the city of Temecula, whether it be in the hallway, in the break room, out in the community, with a council member, with city staff, and a lot of this has been, sort of just impromptu sort of conversations about what are you doing with this property? Well, why don't we do this? And a lot of great ideas have emerged. But we've never taken the time to do what we're about to do today, which is bring the council together and have a high-level conversation about properties that we own, the current zoning assigned to that property, maybe the highest and best use for those properties, how this dovetails into, the ongoing effort for the last 18 months on the Quality of Life Master Plan, the community input that we've gotten. So this is actually a really good time to have this conversation. And to my knowledge, the city of Temecula has never had a workshop quite like this today. So this is a first. I'm looking forward to it. It doesn't have to be the last and probably will not, but we needed to start somewhere. So I think today what we're looking for from the council is really, high level, narrowed, if there is consensus on a few focus areas that you want to give direction to. That's what we as the staff are looking for today, is things for long-term planning that we can build into our effort, into our capital programs over the future years. But we have a facilitator, and I'm going to hand it back over to Andy, who's going to walk us all through, and just appreciate everyone's attention today. So thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Good morning, Mayor, Council. Thank you for having me. My name is Andy Pendoli. I'm with a company called MIG. We're a planning communications firm, and I've been very privileged to be working with you recently. You may recognize me from the Quality of Life Master Plan process. So last time I got to meet with all of you as council was the kickoff to that process as part of the workshop to initiate that effort. So my role here today is simply to get out of your kind of the normal formal council proceedings and a bit more of that workshop setting. We want to make sure we hear from each of you closely in detail about your thoughts about the opportunities with the sites available to help inform this effort, and have some back and forth and be able to share ideas and thoughts to give staff some direction for more deeper evaluation. This is the start of the process. So we'll look forward to getting into that in more detail. I just wanted to give that initial introduction. Part of my role also too is just to help the team, the staff manage time to the extent possible along with all of you. And we know, of course, with our agenda today, we'll be hearing the presentation from the City Attorney's Office. We'll look for, happy to answer questions for you on the Surplus Land Act as it is. Then we'll have a brief overview from staff on the QLMP, the status of that effort, and what's emerging out of that process. And then we can dive into the details. What are the sites that are available? What is the general background of each of those sites? And then from there, we want to move into having that engagement with you to hear your thoughts. What's appealing and of interest to you that you really want to make sure has some close analysis and consideration in the weeks and months ahead. So that's our overview, and we do have a break scheduled at 10:30. I believe there's an event beginning with Representative Isa. So that's at least a break point as you like, and around about that time, we'd love to have you back, hopefully around 10:50, and then we'll continue the proceedings. And to the extent we can we'll wrap up there and abouts around noon today, as you like. So. Any questions on the format and what we'll be covering today? Okay, well, thanks very much. With that, let me turn it over to the City Attorney's Office. Marcella is going to kick us off. Thank you.
Now that's better, sorry. So I'm covering the Surplus Land Act today, which is a very complicated area of law that I'm going to do a very brief overview on. So I'm not going to spend an hour kind of boring you with all the intricacies. What we'd like to cover today is what is it? When does it apply? How does it work? What are the timelines that we need to think about? And how does it impact what we do? So the Surplus Land Act requires local agencies to make land available for affordable housing before selling or leasing land for any other use. So that's kind of the framework that we're starting with. Next slide. You're there already. The definition of the Surplus Land Act. Surplus land is land owned in fee simple by a local agency that is not necessary for agency's use. So this actually does include leases, except under the circumstances where there's going to be no development or demolition on the land that's going to be leased, or the lease has a term of less than 5 years. And that's based on HCD's guidelines on like how to interpret the act. So what we need to think of at the outset is the land necessary for agency's use? So what is agency's use? That includes things like parks, community centers, conservation land, buffer areas, utility corridors, flood control. Those are all things that would be considered agency's use, for which if you fall under that category, then it's a much more streamlined process that you can go through. If you don't fall under the agency use category, then you have to worry about the Surplus Land Act, essentially. So what isn't included within agency use? That's commercial or industrial uses, including non-governmental retail, entertainment, or office development, or property that's disposed of for the sole purpose of investment or generation of revenue. All those things are not considered agency use. The Surplus Land Act does not apply to the disposition of exempt surplus land. So that's kind of other categories we need to think about. So if it's exempt, again, you go through a much more streamlined process than if it's not exempt. There are a whole category of exemptions. These are just a couple of them. So if, for example, the agency were to be exchanging property with another local agency, and that property is necessary for the city or housing authority or whatever local agencies use, we can do that exchange under an exemption. We can also transfer to another local agency or state or federal recognized California tribe for their use. There is a narrow exception for land that is competitively bid for housing development or a mixed-use project where specific requirements are met, including affordability requirements. And we'd have to look at like the specific transaction that's proposed and whether or not it fits under like the myriad of categories that you have to check off in order to fall under that exception. So there are essentially 6 steps to dispose of surplus land. The first is you have to declare it as surplus, and that has to happen at a formal meeting by resolution and supported by written findings. Next, once you've done that declaration, you go to the next step, which is the notice of availability. The notice of availability must be sent to the designated entities that are listed on HCD's website. And so there's a whole list of entities that notice needs to be sent to, and it has to be sent after the property has been declared surplus, but before city staff starts negotiating or anyone starts negotiating with a developer. So that's kind of the interim step. And what that notice availability does is essentially lets affordable housing advocates and other entities know, hey, this property is available for purchase or lease. Then those entities have 60 days to notify the agency that they're interested in purchasing or leasing the property. And if housing is going to be constructed on that site, then at least 25% has to be restricted for lower income households. So that's where the affordable housing component comes into play. So that's the 60-day response period. Then we get into a 90-day good faith negotiation period. So they've got 60 days to respond. Depending on how many responses you get, you would start negotiating for a 90-day period. And if you're not able to reach an agreement on the price and terms, or no one responds to the notice of availability, then there's an obligation to record a different type of restrictive covenant that says essentially that if more than 10 residential units are built on that site, then at least 15% have to be affordable for lower income households. So again, there's this requirement essentially to make it available for affordable housing. Before disposing of any land, now we're on the last step, everything has to be submitted to HCD for review. So after whether you've adopted the resolution saying it's exempt surplus land, that goes to HCD for review. If you've determined it's not exempt and you're going through the process, before you actually execute a purchase and sale agreement or take final action, whether that's DDA or something else, it all has to go to HCD for their final sign off. And the reason is that HCD has authority to essentially issue notices of violation or say you didn't do the process correctly and you have time to fix it. Otherwise, there's pretty severe, significant repercussions, which include things like having to pay back 30% of the sale price. And so we want to make sure that we're complying with those requirements. And so finally, how does it impact what we do? Well, if the property is being used for agency use, then essentially we don't really need to worry about the Surplus Land Act. But if it's going to be used for any other purpose, then we really need to think about, how does the Surplus Land Act apply? Are there exemptions? Are there not? Because it's going to inform what we can actually do and when we can start negotiating with respect to that property. And I'm available for questions if you have any. Yes.
So do we have to declare land as surplus if we own it? How long can we own it and still not declare it surplus? Is there any set rule?
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. There are requirements for us to do an inventory of our land every year for purposes of reporting. But if you're holding it because you think you may use it one day for a park or for a community center or something, it's not like we have to act on that within a set amount of time.
Okay, that was my point, is can we hold it indefinitely for a purpose that we think is going to happen 10, 15, 20 years from now?
Sure, because we don't have the funding or for whatever reason.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
And to follow up with that question, if we aren't sure yet, do we have to designate? We don't have to designate, correct? That was just
Correct.
a follow-up for his. Okay, yeah.
So it's only before you start negotiations or start, actually taking steps to dispose of it, that's when you have to designate it as either exempt surplus land or surplus land. If you want to just sit on the property because we're going to be applying for a grant, we don't know what's going to happen with it, we don't need to take any action.
So on the affordability piece, do you also, as a municipality, get the CEQA exemption if you're meeting that criteria?
No, not that I'm aware of. So I think you have to still comply with CEQA. I can look into that further, but I believe we still have to comply with CEQA unless you fall, I mean, there's certain categories when you're dealing with affordable housing. If it's streamlined approval, then those we wouldn't have to, but if it's just we don't fall under kind of the CEQA exempt affordable housing requirements, then we would have to comply with CEQA.
Okay, but if we did, then you'd be able to achieve that exemption.
Correct. And for leases, you know, there's a CEQA exemption for leases as well. So there are some CEQA exemptions that may apply.
And then for the leases, can you clarify for me? So when you talk about a lease, that's not considered a permanent use of the property if it's termed, right? So does that require you going through the surplus lands process?
If it's more than 5 years and there's going to be a permanent building put there, so let's say the city wants to, or the city or the housing agency wants to hold the property and lease it for like 99 years or something, but we want to be the underlying fee owner, then that transaction would be subject to the Surplus Land Act because it's more than 5 years. If there's going to be no demolition, if there's going to be no construction on the property, then we don't have to worry about it.
Okay, and then what if the city were to do sort of a PPP with the property on housing that included affordable housing component? Does that still require you to go through Surplus Lands Act?
It depends on if it meets certain requirements, and that's where it gets a little bit complicated. So there are certain affordable housing projects where you can go, it would fall under the exempt surplus land component, but it needs to meet certain affordability thresholds and certain other requirements. So like if they have some tax exempt status or something, like it could potentially fall under that category. But not every single affordable housing project falls under the Exempt Surplus Land Act.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, let's continue on, shall we?
Good morning, Mr. Mayor, council members, staff, and members of the public. So as many of you know, we've been working on an update to the Quality of Life Master Plan, or the QLMP. This is a visionary document that identifies the city's 7 core values. It also identifies our strategic priorities to accomplish over the next 20 years, as well as goals, objectives, and indicators to help us measure our progress. And it also serves as the foundation for the city's general plan update. A hallmark of this QLMP update has been public participation. So it all started off with a statistically valid community survey, or the True North survey. And then the City Council appointed a Blue Ribbon Committee, or a BRC, which consisted of the General Plan Update Subcommittee, consisting of Mayor Ron and Councilmember Edwards, one representative from each of the commissions and boards, and then also a diverse group of community stakeholders to work with staff and the consultants in developing the update to the QLMP. In addition to the community survey, we did a specific QLMP survey and a youth and young adult survey, and then we did a number of pop-up events. We were at some of the ribbon cuttings for the new park openings. We were at the special games. We were at Culture Fest to gather additional community input. And then we've had a number of social media posts and a dedicated website to the update. The graphic on the screen is the Citizens' 20-year priorities from the 2030 QLMP. And I won't go through this list because really what's happened is we've accomplished or built more than half of the stuff on this list. So our update has been to update for the 2040 QLMP and add new citizens' priorities to this list. And before I get into the draft, which we just went through last week with the Blue Ribbon Committee, just wanted to make it clear that these are community identified priorities and they're potential projects for consideration on the city-owned vacant lands. And for reference, the list I'm going to go through has been printed out and it's there for reference as Brandon goes through all of the different sites we have. The list does not include road widenings or connections or bridges, certain planning efforts or citywide programs. They're more capital projects that could potentially be for these city-owned vacant lands. So the list includes a CTE center, or Career Technical Education Center, completing the Temecula Loop Trail, mobile library resource vans, or the idea of like a bookmobile. Construction of a transit center, an aquatics facility with an Olympic-sized swimming pool, building a fire training facility with a tower, performing arts center, a second senior center for active adults, new tennis complex, new pickleball courts, an organic community garden, and then a potential wineries, hotel, Old Town transit line and park and ride, so we can promote a park once mentality and then have a future trolley that would take you to wine country, Pachanga, or Old Town is the concept there. So that's a summary of the draft Citizens 20-year priorities, and I'm available for questions.
Any questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Good morning, Council. Good to see everyone and the public. Today we're going to go over site priorities to discuss all of the different vacant sites for this workshop. We're going to be continuing to listen to the community at this meeting as well as future meetings through the QLMP process, but what we're looking for is council feedback on some of our existing vacant land sites. So we're going to provide a brief overview of those sites, and then we're going to have the opportunity for the council to ask questions on potential actions. Again, these aren't commitments, permanent commitments, potential actions we'll be discussing today. Ultimately, staff is looking for your top 3 priorities from, and there may be some consensus, there may not, but we're looking to get direction to focus the city's resources to move some of these vacant parcels forward in relation to the QLMP or potential other actions. We do expect to have more workshops like this in the future, so if we don't get to a site or we don't get to discuss something, it's not lost. We will have these meetings in the future. So the potential direction that the council could give to staff today, we kind of broke it down in a red light, green light, yellow light system. So the red light is hold, take no near-term actions and hold the property to evaluate for future QLMP objectives. The second option would be explore surplus. As the city attorney mentioned earlier, the Surplus Property Act is very complex, so we need to explore the potential options before we go into detail so that we can better inform council before any permanent decision is made. Again, with exploring surplus properties, the site could be used for affordable housing because it would go before the affordable housing development community first, and or those funds could potentially be used for affordable housing or other QLMP objectives depending on the ownership of the land and how we want to use those funds. Finally, the last option would be evaluate one of the sites for a QLMP project. So we would go out, explore it, see if it's viable based on the council's direction. And again, we're looking for the top 3 for this. So I'm going to go through all these properties. Feel free, if we're not orienting you properly on where the site is, I'm going to go through, give you some information on them. And then we will have at the end of all these sites a discussion and roundtable, so you'll be able to provide input with Andy today. But we've got some videos, again, thanks to our IT department to putting that together, and I'll go through these briefly. If you have any questions, feel free to stop me. So the first site of discussion is the Diaz property. This site's approximately 30 acres. It's in a planned development overlay. And this originally had a consideration as potentially a higher education complex with residential housing. And it is assigned a substantial number of affordable units in the city's current housing element, approximately 629 affordable units. If that site were to be sold or surplus, those units would have to be made up somewhere else if the site were to be developed. So that's something the council should know in their considerations. Additionally, it should be understood that there is some industrial zoning that does surround the site. I'll show you a brief photo of this. You'll see that Diaz is located on the left side of your screen. This is the vacant parcel as it is. And we've got a lot of industrial uses adjacent to it, as well as the future Jefferson Uptown parked on the left side of the screen. Any particular questions on that site?
What's the usable footprint? Because there's some constraints on that property.
The usable footprint, well, you've got a total of 30 acres. We'd have to study that in more detail to understand. It's also dependent on the development community that would be attached to that, as well as, if you're doing an affordable project, they would be allowed certain concessions. So it's a complex answer on that. I don't have an exact figure for it, but we would definitely be able to explore that for you.
Well, wasn't there a chunk of that has cultural or?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's about a 1 acre portion that has an easement over it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I'll just add too, in addition, you guys, many of you know, this site also was considered at one point, or maybe multiple points, a water park site too. So in between higher education and college, it's been It's been a concept for a number of things. One thing I will mention that's unique to this property is, let's say, hypothetically, the city of Temecula, being that it's in an industrial park, said, hey, let's sell this. And we would have to go through the Surplus Land Act, but the proceeds of that sale of this specific property would be earmarked and reserved and only could be used for affordable housing investment within the city of Temecula. So I just wanted to make that point made.
I do have a question. So when you mentioned about the 629 affordable units, so that number was assigned to that parcel. Is that the number that we told the state we have 629 units that can fit on this parcel? So therefore, if it doesn't get built, it doesn't get built, but we've assigned that. So we have to then assign another property. Yes. So I just kind of want to make that clear for anybody who didn't understand it like me. So,
That's
all right,
correct.
thanks.
One other, can I just make one comment on that? So
Yeah.
it's assigned 629 units of affordable housing, but one of the silver linings there is that if we wanted to do something else with that property, we would have to go find those units somewhere else, but the property is owned by the Affordable Housing Fund, like Aaron said, which means that we would have funding to go find those units somewhere else, which isn't typically the case. So there's a little bit of a silver lining to the fact that those units would need to be found somewhere else.
And then we could also use that money to actually help a builder build it. That's the other
Exactly.
key important factor,
Exactly.
because a lot of builders, it doesn't pencil out without substantial contribution from the city itself. So,
I have a question, Matt.
Wait, Zach?
Thank you, Mayor. Just one quick question. I fully recognize that market conditions changed, but 30 acres industrial zoning, what does that capture in the market today? Just a general guess.
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you. I
Okay.
don't know. I honestly just don't know.
Well, not an Amazon warehouse, for sure.
All right, fair enough.
Marion?
Maybe a member of the brokerage community in public comment could let us know.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If this is the portion of the meeting where we are able to suggest something that might go on that location, and the CTE Career Center, a campus on its own, is on our list of priorities, and I know that they need about that much space. And I know also that they kind of want to make it a regional draw, so it would include all Temecula students and possibly Murrieta as well, this being on the border. And I know they're also talking with Murrieta, but that's just one idea. And of course, we wouldn't do anything without considering the school district, and they are in very preliminary discussions
Right.
about that whole project.
Absolutely. To your question about the conversation on uses, I'd love to save more thoughts from each of you about each site and what you'd envision after, if you don't mind, after we get through Brandon's review of all the sites and talk in more detail about what you'd like to make sure is kind of explored and not left behind, things such as potential CTE use. So thank you. Good. Any other questions for Brandon? Just on, yeah, good. All right. Well, let's keep moving. And
all right, for the second site, we've got the Jefferson Avenue Uptown site. This is within a specific plan, the Uptown Temecula specific plan. Some other considerations on this site is there is an alignment for a future interchange. There is market rate residential that is currently in the development process adjacent to the site. There's also proximity to a future sports park, and this is owned by the Affordable Housing Fund as well. There's about $1 million of CRP funds that's been associated with this project, and obviously those funds could be used to prime an additional affordable project. So this is another site to consider. Let me give you a brief overview. On the left-hand side, you'll see Jefferson Avenue, and you'll see the JRC over on the right-hand side of the screen with the 15 freeway in the background on the right-hand side of the screen.
How much of the interchange would take up this parcel?
It's about the back half. So you can see the red there, and then the back half up against the street would be the portion that's going towards the interchange.
So how much usable would be?
We have
available?
about, I think it's close to, what, 1.5 acres, 2 acres there, usable?
Yeah, I think all of the red is usable.
Yeah.
And it's the portion that's not red, that would be for the interchange.
Okay.
Any other questions on this particular site? All right. So we're going to move on to Margarita Road and Harveston Way. This site is approximately 1.73 acres. The zoning is open space with the general plan matching as well. This is across from Chaparral High School and adjacent to flood control. And this is a destination along the proposed Temecula Loop as well. This video is a really good one demonstrating Chaparral High School on the right, but it does show kind of the slope and some of the issues that could potentially hinder any potential projects. But you can see Harveston is on the left and Margarita Road for this particular site. Any questions on that particular site? All right. We'll go ahead and move on to Rory Ranch, Somers Bend as well. This site is approximately 200 acres. It's located within a specific plan, obviously the Rory Ranch specific plan. Some considerations are that there are natural surface trails connecting Somers Bend and Lake Skinner's Trail. These are proposed, of course. This is currently dedicated for conservation, but the city does have some rights to a trail. There would need to be some discussions with the agencies to understand how we would work together for a cooperative use agreement for this trail, and that can be a little bit of a complex process. And let me do a brief video overview of that site as well. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see Somers Bend, the newest phases of development on the right-hand side. The sports park would be right outside the view of the drone.
Any questions on Rory?
Was that what was with the Johnson Reserve?
That's correct. That was part of the Johnson Reserve. All right, for the next site, we've got our La Serena site, which is near Rancho Elementary. This site is approximately 3.5 acres. The zoning is split, so it's public, institutional, and open space. The general plan designation would be open space as well. There are some planned trail connections on the site, and there's also some potential that we could work with the school district to have further considerations on whether they would need the site or swapping of some sites. On the video here, you'll see Rancho Elementary on the left-hand side. You can see that there's already some potential trail connections here to the Temecula Hills Park over there as well. As we're looking, this would be southbound view. Any questions on that particular site?
Yeah, so go back to the previous slide. No?
You want the video?
Video.
Is what you're asking
Yeah,
for?
the video, yeah.
Okay.
So does that trail actually exist right now?
This was not graphically added. This exists.
Okay, very cool.
Any other questions on this
What
site?
Constraints?
Brandon, can you go back to that
Sure.
site plan real quick? I believe if we had taken the photograph from the street, there's quite a bit of topo, right, associated with this parcel, which does lend itself to maybe some development challenges as well, too.
Well, and hydrology too, I'm guessing, is that the big?
If I might add, that trail is used for students to go down to the school from Meadowview.
Yeah, I was going to add that connects to Meadowview to Del Rey, Stu, is where that sidewalk goes to.
Is that a city maintained trail?
It's city-owned land, and so we would be maintaining it.
All right.
Okay. Great.
Our next site would be Mcnagar Park. This is approximately 20.34 acres. The vacant portion of the site that we're talking about today is approximately 10 acres. The zoning is park and recreation with a general plan designation of open space. Some considerations is this is part of our trail gap closure plan, number 6 in our multi-use trails plan. And additionally, there are connections to Target, but there are some significant environmental challenges on the site. When we play the video in just a moment, please pay attention to the river stream area over here. You'll see there's some pretty substantial drop-offs there. So on the left-hand side, you'd see the Target Shopping Center about mid-screen. Right-hand side is the existing park, and this is the potential site in question. But you'll see there are some significant drop-offs here, and obviously some environmental considerations being next to a stream.
Have there been, because I know that's the back end of Target and that development is a little bit challenged, let's say. Have there ever been any considerations of opening that property from that end to get more traffic? I mean, if we were ever to develop that as a
Yeah,
more substantial?
Absolutely. It's part of the Bikeways and Trails Master Plan that there's going to be a connection there. You have residential surrounding that entire area on the backside of Target. So opening that up, creating a trail, creating access to the park, connecting to the trail system that already exists, as well as potentially giving the existing apartment development there an access into the Target shopping center is definitely high on the radar. It's kind of a confluence of potential trails. And, you know, the Target shopping center has a residential mixed-use overlay where there could be residential built in that shopping center. And we would anticipate that any development in that shopping center would have a condition to make some improvements to that connection.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions on that particular site? Okay. So on site number 7, we've got the Rancho California Diaz site. The zoning is currently service commercial. This is under an exclusive negotiating agreement until December 2022 for a potential hotel. So just wanted to get that on your radar as well. And here's an overview of the site. Again, Rancho California Diaz. This was part of a road realignment many, many years ago. And you would have Diaz, obviously, 2 connections on the screen here, and this would be Rancho California Road.
How much, if we were to decommission that road, how much additional useful acreage could you pick up?
Do you know, Pat, abouts?
I'm not sure of the acreage, but I believe the center of the road is the property line. So the west side would be part of the city, and then the east side would actually technically be Riverside County flood property.
So not
and
a lot.
That is actually what is being considered as part of that hotel development, is to close that section of the road there.
Okay.
Any other questions on this particular site?
Yeah. So who actually owns that parcel? Is it part of the old redevelopment agency, or?
It's city-owned.
It's city-owned?
City-owned.
Okay,
Yep.
all right.
Moving on to site number 8, which is Main Street and Mercedes Y, right out in front of Old Town here. The site is approximately 0.96 acres. It's located within the Old Town specific plan in the downtown core district. It is part of the specific plan implementation for the general plan. There has been past and successful project history on the site. Is currently, there's some other considerations, maybe an interim park use. It is currently being used for parking. And the parking was placed there as a part of our COVID support efforts in the past. So this is the site right out front. Any questions on that particular site? Okay. We'll move on to site number 9, which is Santiago and Pujol. This site is approximately 0.64 acres. The current zoning is Parks and Recreation District and Conservation Open Space. So that is a split zoning on that site. Some other considerations that have been discussed are potential modular skate park. Pat, I don't know if you have anything else to add on that, but let me do a quick overview of the site here. Again, this would be the flood control channel, the old Boys and Girls Club building located here. Any questions on that?
That continuing south there, what's the ownership of the remainder of that vacant plateau?
Yeah, that's owned by the Flood Control District, and it's actually part of our license agreement for the trail system along the creek there. Is the city actually will be maintaining that under that license agreement, but it is owned by the Flood Control District.
If we were to contemplate some larger park or, you know, recreational type use, could we have an agreement that extends through there?
I believe we could. As far as I know, the Flood Control District doesn't have any intended or proposed use for that. It's just to remain open. But if we did have some potential use, I believe that the district would be willing to work with us on that.
But there's no like environmental constraints that would preclude? No.
No.
Okay, that's good.
One thing, I don't know if it'll come to fruition or not, but we did ask our congressional representatives for consideration of funding to do a temporary skate park at this location. And if that happens to come to fruition, that might be something that, you know, while we do the long-term improvements to the skate park in the future at Ronald Reagan. So.
Any other questions on that site?
Oh, one final thing is I do believe it's fair to share that I think it's the full intention of the Boys and Girls Club to get in there on that adjacent property and through a capital campaign to renovate that site and reopen it for the benefit of the residents down there. I don't have a timeline for that. I don't know the feasibility of that, but I believe that is their plan.
I know, Mr. Mayor, they are in discussions right now with the new development there on the west side.
Yeah, good.
All right, moving on to site number 10. This is south of Temecula the Temecula Parkway interchange. The site is approximately 35.5 acres. The current zoning is highway tourism and conservation open space. Some other considerations, obviously this is part of the interchange project, and it's adjacent to the creek, and there's other tribal considerations as well. Here's a video overview of the site. And that's obviously the 15 on the left-hand side of the screen, the creek, some environmental concerns obviously along that area as well. Any questions on this site?
Maybe in my lifetime. Real quick one. The small parcel just north of there.
Right here?
Yep. What's the status of that one?
That was acquired for the reconstruction of the interchange, and it's owned by the city and just, vacant at this point. That's where the old ARCO station was.
Yeah.
We actually did have a first right of refusal agreement with the owner of the ARCO that we purchased that from, but that has now expired.
Okay. So could we consider that then part of this overall? Is the zoning the same, or probably not, right?
Let me get the exact zoning on that particular site for you. I believe it would be highway tourism, but we're going to confirm that in just a second for you.
All right.
But I think it's reasonable to consider that those properties could be considered for one similar project.
Yeah.
They're both owned by the city. So.
I can confirm it is highway tourism as well.
Yeah, it's the same zoning.
But then all the way down to the Margarita River there, most of that's probably undevelopable for open space and cultural and biological hydrology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have a guess, just back of the envelope, of south of the ARCO parcel, how much might be developable?
It may be half.
Yeah, I'd say
approximately half.
no more than half. Yeah. Because most of that, even on the screen there, is in the creek.
Right.
That red shaded area is in the creek.
Okay.
Any other questions on this particular site? All right. Moving on, we've got the Santiagones site. This site is approximately 7.74 acres. The current zoning is very low residential. There's been a lot of discussions over this site over the many years. We've solicited a lot of community feedback as well. And here's a video overview of that site. Any questions on this site?
The drainage, that's not blue line, is it? Is that just?
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
Pat, you may know.
There is a drainage course that runs through there, so that would need to be accommodated if there were any development were to take place on the property.
Okay.
And who owns that parcel? Is that a city?
Yes.
Okay. And so, and how many lots, how many residential lots is that?
So your VL zoning at minimum, you probably get, what, 4 or 5 units on there? Not much more than that. Yeah. 4 or 5
Yeah.
units max.
Okay. And so if we were to sell that, would the city retain the funds or would it go to the taxing agencies?
No, the city would retain the funds.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is that general fund funds or is that designated funds for some other purpose?
Nope, general funds.
Okay.
Just for a reminder, this was the property that was to be a Methodist church, and the Los Ranchitos Homeowners Association had heartburn about a Methodist church there, so we swapped properties with the Methodist church, and we ended up with this one, and they ended up where they are over by Temecula Valley High School.
So I got a quick question. I mean, and this is obviously, they're in District 2. what are we hearing? I mean, going out there all the time, I'm seeing, you know, I mean, we got the housing, but what are the people wanting out there? I mean, I know I'm looking at possibly parks, things like that, but what are those people in your opinion, Luke?
We haven't done any outreach on this property particularly, so I don't know if we can really say what the neighbors want for sure. I mean, I can make a guess, but I won't assume anything here today.
Yeah.
We just haven't done that outreach.
Okay.
Without direction from the council to move forward on anything, we haven't done the outreach.
Okay.
It almost doesn't matter. We're going to get sued. I have a quick question for Marcella, though, on that parcel. So with the zoning, can you just clarify for me if that were proposed for the affordable, the zoning then doesn't matter exactly if you're under that sort of CEQA exemption if you hit the thresholds?
So it depends on the project. So if it's you know, a density bonus project, or if it's an SB 35 project and it qualifies, then to a certain extent they get a lot more unit count than they ordinarily would. But they have to meet certain criteria in order to do that. So I wouldn't say the zoning doesn't matter. It's just they can do more than what the underlying zoning allows if criteria is met. If it's not, then, or if they don't meet the affordability thresholds, then they wouldn't get those additional bonuses.
Got it. Thanks.
Any other questions on this site?
I'll just add that I believe this property is located within a HOA. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Site number 12 is the Ronald Reagan Sports Park, affectionately known as the Pit. This site is approximately 5 acres, and the current zoning is Parks and Recreation. Additionally, the general plan designates it as open space. This is currently highly utilized as a soccer field as a current site, but there's been some discussions about potential pickleball complex. So I'm going to do you a video overview of this site as well. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see Margarita Road. Temecula Valley High School would be right behind that, and you've got the fire station would be just to the right of the screen as well.
So if I can just add a little bit of context on this, this is entirely within the Ronald Reagan Sports Park footprint, so it's not vacant land in the sense of most of the other parcels, but it's being included here because following the subcommittee meeting for the Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Subcommittee, looking at the pickleball complex, there was the decision to defer decisions about locations until after this larger workshop could take place in case other locations could be identified. And this was one location that had been potentially identified for the pickleball complex. So just for a little bit of backstory for those of you who weren't on the subcommittee.
And Mr. Mayor, question, how many courts would that accommodate? Do we know?
So the plan under the CIP is for a 12-court complex. 12 courts would take up approximately half of the green space you see there. That's roughly a soccer field size. But this site would require a fair amount of improvement in terms of parking, restrooms, and the entranceway would have to be improved if it were to become a pickleball complex. The advantage for that is that, you know, the location, totally within a sports park, already lit, and you can kind of see the topography there, that it's in a basin, which is great for sound retention. But so that's sort of the background on this piece.
Any other questions on this site for staff? Okay.
All right. Site number 13 is right off of Wolf Valley Road. This site is approximately 1.63 acres. It is located with the Wolf Creek specific plan. The general plan designation is public institutional. This was considered at one point potentially for a library site, and let me do a video overview for you as well. It is surrounded by residential uses, and you'll see the Wolf Creek Fire Station located adjacent as well. Any particular questions on this site?
One quick one. So that was originally when we went through that process proposed for a senior housing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the outcome of that? Why did that one not follow through? Do you remember?
Well, we had limited funds And I think that the council chose Vine Creek ultimately at the time, depending on the funding amount that was available at that time, as the kind of the winning project out of that RFP process. We stayed in touch with the developer and continue to talk with them, but that's some years ago now, so I think that we would need to redo that RFP and kind of take a look at it starting from scratch again.
Yeah, because I remember when we did that, we said, well, you can still proceed if you have other options for funding and all that, so they never pursued those other fundings. They were relying on us.
They needed city funds
to kick that forward. Do you recall how much offhand they were looking at?
How many units? I think it was 45 to 50 units. Yeah.
Okay. Because it was a good project and it was a nice.
It was a good design.
Design for that.
It was.
Yeah. So, okay.
Mr. Mayor, question, those two large parcels on Pachanga Parkway, those are the Pachanga parcels, correct?
Okay. Yes.
All right. Any other questions on this site? All right. On site number 14 is Capino and Pachanga Parkway. This site is approximately 0.19 acres. It's an open space conservation currently, the open space general plan designation as well. There's been some discussions about potential water efficient landscape demonstration project with Rancho California Water District on this site. And let me provide a video overview of that. Any questions on this particular site? All right, so that wraps up kind of our overview of all the different sites. And I just wanted to provide a brief recap on kind of the potential staff direction that we could have today. So the first one is red light, take no near-term actions and hold the property for future QLMP objectives. Yellow light would be explore surplus, land act process, again, potentially use funds towards affordable housing or expediting the delivery of affordable housing. Additionally, we could evaluate the site for a QLMP project as some of the projects that Matt had mentioned earlier. And then we're looking for the City Council's top 3 priority sites today. I'm going to turn it on over to Andy, who's going to facilitate our City Council roundtable.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Brandon. Thanks, Matt. Thanks to all the staff that helped contribute to that. A lot of great work went into that. So indeed, as noted, we want to kick off closely here this conversation with you to hear from each of you about your initial thoughts. What kind of, right now, are kind of your, as we look at these options, the sites on the table, which are kind of your top 3 at this point that you'd like to see explored in more significant detail? You know, and what are some of those considerations that you'd like to ensure that staff explore? When we say to go evaluate and explore and study, what are some of those factors that you'd like to make sure staff are closely analyzed and considered to the greatest extent they can? So when if they come back to you with more detailed analysis of a given site, you know, they left no stone unturned, right? And make sure there's ideally no questions left to be asked to the extent we can do that. So that's the level of input we'd like to hear from you to start with. And again, just to check in on time, we're doing well here on our agenda. Thank you all for working with the format and letting Brandon get through the material. So as we noted, just to remind you, around 10:30 is the planned pause point for a break to check in on the other event. In the meantime, we'd love to get started and start to hear from you. And so if I may, Mayor, would love to start with you. What right now is rising to the top for you as kind of
I'll defer to my colleagues to go first. I'll chime in at the end.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you.
Nice.
Let me come to the Mayor Pro Tem. Schwenk, would you like to kick things off for us to give your thoughts on
Yeah, I didn't have a choice, do I? So this is going to obviously be difficult. I mean, I think we have a pretty decent mix of properties. Some projects are feasible, others are not. I don't know. For me, it's going to be difficult to pick 3, right? I think maybe, for me, it will maybe come a little more organically.
Right.
The Diaz property, so I'll just start there and kind of maybe in there right now. I know it's set up for affordable housing. I don't genuinely like affordable housing there. It's so far out, right? There's no services. It's just kind of the fringe, really, if you will, of the community. Councilmember Stewart and I have been bouncing around several ideas within Parks and Rec subcommittee. And Aaron, you mentioned this was the sort of water park, you know, years ago. I kind of like it as like a sports court complex, if you will, like pickleball, tennis, lit basketball courts, kind of that use. Not knowing the value of it is really difficult to say, oh, we should consider selling it. That's obviously a consideration to understand the value of what that property is and then how we could reinvest those funds in affordable housing. But if we're looking at a hold or future uses, I do like that it is along the Murrieta Creek Regional Trail, eventually connecting up into Murrieta. I think for, there's obviously some public-private partnership opportunities there for several of the projects that we have on our list. But really trying to find a space for that pickleball complex has been problematic. And if anyone was at our subcommittee meeting, it was a pretty difficult conversation trying to find that. So for me, this kind of jumped out as a space where, we get questions from families about why can't I access the schools to play in the basketball courts and whatnot. So I know folks would have to drive here, but you could really run some great leagues out of here. Again, pickleball, tennis, we're always struggling with tennis courts now, and pickleball is gaining steam. So for me, that's kind of where I would land with this space. Again, not fully understanding what the value of that is and how we could reinvest that back in. But for right now, for me, that it would be some sort of sports court facility, certainly large enough to accommodate parking and a significant amount of people to be out there to enjoy pickleball, tennis, and basketball and things like that. So
good.
I'll stop there on this one.
All right. Well, let me, if you don't mind, with you, let me ask you. What about a next one? Would be maybe number 2 for now as a top 3 for you? We'll start with 2. Sorry, just to check in. I'll be flexible. We'll start with 2 with each of you, and then we'll kind of yeah.
I like the Santiago and Inez lot as like a community garden. I know it's super problematic with the homeowners, and the idea of anything going there is likely, not really feasible. So I'll just lead with that. The expansion of Mcnagar Park, I think, is something we should really look at. I think there's an opportunity there to connect the existing park with that open space there. The community around there would certainly benefit, and then connecting into potential, well, there are homes on the other side in that Target Center, not in the Target Center, but adjacent to that already, which would connect them to that park, then obviously across to the new Margarita Recreation Center, which will be a hub for that part of town. So I think there's a lot of value in exploring this site to try to make those connections to really close the loop on that part of our city and the residents around there. I think there'd be a lot of value in exploring what that looks like. And I know it's problematic again with the creek and sort of what's going through there, but I know it's not insurmountable. I know we could certainly make that connection, and I think it would be a great addition for that community.
Now's a good opportunity to, if we're going to take some time to dive in, that's a site that you think is worthwhile at this time.
That's correct.
Great.
I do. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Andy, can I just ask a question related to this property? From a access standpoint, correct me if I'm wrong, but is there access off of Rancho Way? And I think you have to enter the church property to get back to this, but is that even potentially feasible down the road if we were to, develop the site? Is that something that we could work through private property owners and or easements and things of that nature to get vehicular access off Rancho Way, in addition to ped crossing over the creek on the north end? I don't know, Pat, do you see that?
The access across the church property, I think that would have to be worked out with the church, and I'm not sure where that stands. The crossing the creek, as you mentioned, there's a pretty significant amount of work that needs to be done to the creek itself, and then potentially like a pedestrian bridge is something that would potentially be feasible.
If I could go back real quick, I just did a little back of the napkin calculation on the Diaz property with industrial values these days hovering around $30 a foot. That would make the Diaz property worth about $40 to $45 million.
That's important. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, it's depending on offsite, so that number is going to be the top end, and then it's going to come down as we talk about, you know, the constraints of the site and things like that. So that's just a ballpark high-end figure.
Okay. Thank you. I know we jumped around a little. Thank you for jumping in with that. So with Mcnagar Park, then access considerations, you know, we'll want to study closely what are opportunities to make those connections. Patrick's got some ideas, so this will be something that, you know, staff can take back to look at closely about how that can really be maximized. Because it really sounds like, again, the really exciting part, as noted, you know, it's really a major gap closure and a connectivity piece. So it's hard not to want to make sure we leverage all those opportunities with a site like this. So very good. All right, thank you very much. I'd love to come to Councilmember Alexander if you're ready. We'll start with your top two for now that you're really feeling like it's time to dive in. Please, you can give me three if you want. If you're ready with all three, go for it.
All right, so just a couple questions. Just putting this out there, I love the area in Santiago and Yanez. I'd like to find out more of what the residents want in that area. I know there was some property, I believe, a couple months ago that they were talking about, and they had spoken at their meeting that they would like to have more trails and walking areas. So not as a priority, but just putting it out there that I'd like to kind of know more of what they want in that property. So as far as for that, but I have to agree with Council Member Schwank that, here we go again, that I like the area for Diaz property. One of the things that I had thought about was maybe like a field house area. That's, I think, one thing that we don't have. I know we have a lot of parks and things, but would that area on Diaz property be a good facility for field houses, things like that, just for sports, you know, different tournaments? I think that's a great area, especially being in an industrial area as well. So that would be probably that area for me. The next area would, let me see, the Ronald Reagan Sports Park. I love the idea of the pickleball. I think that would be really great. I think it'd be just really good for the community to kind of have their area to be able to build up and something that they're wanting. And so that would be a really big one as well. I think the next one was, my next slide, and I don't know if even this would be possible, but for number 4, I know it's been going back and forth, and I think I spoke to the chief maybe in the last year about number 4 and possibly, and Mayor Matt Ron, you would know this too, could we do something like that for a fire training center? No, okay, he's already telling me no. So something like that I think would be whatever site he knows, because he's really good with that stuff. So to be able to utilize that to do a fire training center.
So fire training at
But he's saying we can't do it there, so I'll listen to him on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, so those would be my top one. Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing, is like trails, maybe back there or something like that.
It sounds like they're more amenable to that idea of trails, but I just remember the day that we purchased that property for $1 and we couldn't even touch it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
Mr. Mayor, it's the Center for Natural Lands Management,
That's right.
That's the agency that we've been working with for over a decade or more,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
so
Good.
see. I think that was it. I think those are my top ones, because I wasn't too sure. Or even since we can't build up that last one, even the Boys and Girls Club area, I think would be really, really good to just give our kids some more access points to being outside. And
Great.
especially as Councilmember Marion was saying that they're going to be building up, I think that'd be a great part to be compatible with, to connect with them. So
Good. And I wanted to note, Councilmember, that, you know, I appreciate you.
I was all over on that one, sorry.
No, that's great. What I wanted to circle back on is on the fire training center, and it's important to hear from all of you. We have a use, we have a need that we need to fulfill. I don't know where it can be right now, but I'd like staff to keep this on the radar, and as the next step in diving into analysis of sites, if and when and how staff can come back with some more analysis that could suggest it could potentially work here, maybe there, you know, we want to hear that too. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So
thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Very good. So let me come around to Councilmember Edwards. did I catch, sorry, I caught
Well,
you.
no, it's okay. I was just about to ask Mayor Ron if a fire training center would work in the parcel along the 15 freeway on the south side. Yeah, that's because it's lower than the freeway. It's kind of out of sight. It's secluded from everything. It's close to the reserve if they wanted to combine that with anything else.
So you, sorry,
Yeah.
this is the Temecula Parkway adjacent parcel?
Yes. Yes, because it's such a
Potentially.
bizarre shaped piece of property. And the location next to the freeway, I mean, it's a great location. It's remote, even though it's right there, you know, in the south side, but it is remote because of the no structures nearby. So I like the training center for that, for number 10. I was kind of going for the low-hanging fruit, and it seemed like the Ronald Reagan Sports Park and the pit is perfect for pickleball, and it's something that we could do fairly quickly, but Councilmember Stewart and I were talking about parking being an issue. If we can do half of it pickleball courts, the other half would be parking, and somehow those fields are challenged for parking anyway. People are always trying to park along that little narrow pathway that leads back to both of the fields from the main parking area. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want the baseballers fighting with the pickleballers because it would be bat versus racket, and that could be really ugly. But if we could, yeah, if we could somehow make that work, that just seems like a no-brainer to me.
Thank you, appreciate that. Because by all means, we'd like you all to tell us more specifics about those things you want to make sure are studied as much as can be by staff on a technical level and consideration of uses, potential conflicts or constraints that may come up. So thank you for sharing that insight. Please, but continue.
Well, I've been talking about Santiago and Inez since my first official budget meeting in 2006.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's been no rush to really develop that location. We know it's going to be a challenge because of Los Ranchitos Homeowners Association. And rightly so, they're very protective of their residents. So, but it's a great location. We don't really have what we would consider to be a passive, like a regional park, just something with tall trees and pathways and a lot of shade and maybe really a small water feature or something where people just could go and contemplate. They're going to, depending on the environment at the time, would depend. That's what they would contemplate on. So, it wouldn't be lighted necessarily, or maybe just really passive lights along a pathway or something like that. But
so it'd be some level of improvement, a relatively light, presumably light use, if you would,
yes,
as a passive.
It would have to be light use, I think, to get a buy-in from the homeowners association. But I told Pat that I went by this morning and saw all of our road equipment there. We've been using that site for so long for storage, and we have to have some place to keep everything while we're working on roads. So, we're going to have to, find something else.
That equipment is there just temporarily.
Yes, and it is, every time it's there, it's temporary, so that is true.
We're restriping Inez. It's not there all the time.
It's not the official new corporation yard.
No, it is not.
Stuff.
And we will emphasize that for the newspapers. It is not a permanent storage yard in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Thank you very much. All right, good. Mayor Stewart, Councilmember Stewart, I apologize.
Okay, so I agree a lot with what Councilmember Schwenk over there was saying. However, the Diaz property, it would be a great sports park if it wasn't so valuable. And so if we can even get $30 million for that site and be able to use that to develop Uptown Jefferson in the low-cost housing, which also puts it closer to all the things that those people would need. I mean, if you're wherever you live, you need a grocery store. You need all the facilities necessary to live. So that's why I think it would be better use that money to promote Uptown Jefferson, to create what we want to create in Uptown Jefferson. And then for the Santiago property, Santiago and Inez, I see I've been approached by the Historical Society, who has access to a whole turn-of-the-century home just on the other side of Pujol. So it's on Pujol. And so she unfortunately has to sell the property, and they would have to demolish this house. And all of a sudden my wheels start turning. It's like, okay, the community garden idea, I like that. And so what if we were able to take a historic home like that, put it on that property, create a community garden like literally around it. So now you've created like a historical type park that is also active with community involvement as far as gardening is concerned, which also allows for additional parking, that when we have major events like in Old Town, we would have access to that additional parking that could be used on that particular piece of property. Yeah. And so, and still, we might be able to still notch out a couple of properties or lots and sell them off as home sites, to actually possibly even fund everything that we're going to do there. And so, because that's a pretty large piece of property, and we don't need that much for a community garden. We don't need that much for, so I'm kind of thinking my businessman wheels. It's like, how do we do this and pay for it? And so it's like, I like that idea, and if we could get this historical home and preserve it on that property, and give, maybe even it's open, you can kind of walk through it and see how they lived 100 years ago or 120 years ago, because it's turn of the century. So yeah, so that's what I was kind of envisioning on the Santiago property. I do think, again, with Zach over there, the Mcnagar Park expansion, I think it's crucial. I think we need to activate that whole area on that side of the creek. And I've had conversations, in fact, I think several of us had conversations with the church there, who is suffering from lack of parking. Yeah. And so I think they would be very interested in a deal that would allow them access to the parking during church, on Sundays, and for a path through their property to get to the back half. So, yeah, so I think if we could create more parking there, that'll will help the pickleball situation. As more pickleballers are using the Margarita Park or the Mcnagar Park. I think that to me is crucial. Plus, the homeless do tend to gravitate to that area too, and by activating that whole area, it kind of keeps that area kind of protected. And so I think that is a crucial part to this. In my list, I got a lot of holds. I don't have very many. I have 0 get rid of properties. So. Other than the Diaz property, and that's only because if we can utilize that funds for low-cost housing somewhere where it's more appropriate, I think that's a win-win. Plus, if it turns into an industrial use, we've just created more jobs, we've created more income for the city long-term. So I think, yeah, to me that one's a win-win-win. So so that's what I'm thinking with those 3 properties. So.
Very good.
Done.
Thank you. Mayor.
All right. Well, so let's start with the Diaz property. I think passive or active recreation out there, it sounds nice, but it's in the middle of an industrial area. So it has to have some, I think, industrial type or municipal type use. And its value certainly outweighs, anything. So let me back up and say the key highlights for me in picking my top 3 properties. First was jobs and workforce development. The second was economic stability. So whatever we do with some of these properties, we have to think economically, like what are the, we've got plenty of parks, we've got plenty of all these other things. And I'm not discounting that. I'm just saying from my perspective, it's, as we start to see a shift from that development community to a maintenance community, and as we start seeing development around the region, our tax revenue is going to change as a result of that. So the more we can do to help stabilize our tax revenue base. I think that's another priority of mine. Housing is a top priority, and specifically workforce housing. And then public safety, of course, right? So starting with the Diaz property, I think this one, from an economic development perspective, is huge. And it was mentioned earlier, well, it might be interesting as a CTE site for, looking at technical education, because, they've talked about a university out there. Well, that may be an option as well out on that property is partnering with, since we're already in the industrial areas, partnering with all of those folks, the trade organizations and others that have those training programs along with MSJC and Cal State of taking 30 acres and putting it into, a large-scale training facility. And certainly the relationship with all of our industrial partners, in that corridor would make a lot of sense. That's one potential use, of course, but I don't want to discount, two other potential uses. One is just straight up selling the property and letting it go into industrial, because like Stu said, 100% agree, that additional revenue, especially if they have point of sale or something out of there that we could take advantage of, that's huge. But then the other, and I don't want to ignore it completely, is this idea of housing. It's not, the best place, but if you've got a 30-acre parcel, that's a lot of land to work with. And if we're talking about, what we have been over the last year or so is this, workforce housing for our local, and we've been talking about, various issues, public partnerships, private partnerships, that kind of thing to get that done. If that property also came along with, some localized services for the residents and kind of a mixed use sort of philosophy too, potentially that's a big win as well. But so I'd hate to see the property as, going into just some sort of recreational use, because the value would just, is so overwhelming for what the potential is there. Mm-hmm. The other one, I don't want us to forget, like right in front of City Hall, nobody's mentioned it. I was kind of surprised. Those 2 vacant parcels, we got to do something on. I don't want to hold on to them anymore. It's a dirt lot in front of City Hall. And I know we've struggled to try and figure out what it is, but as we start to see Old Town, look, the development of City Hall drove a lot of the change we saw in Old Town. This is our opportunity to fill in 2 more parcels with fairly significant development. The concepts, that we did have in front of us before were, substantial. It's disappointing not to see it move forward, but I really think we need to kickstart that again and really get something out there, whether it's an RFP or Q or some alphabet. I think we just absolutely need to get something moving out here, because in the long term, economic prosperity, stability, jobs, all of that, those 2 parcels are huge.
And excuse me, Mayor, just for everybody's benefit, for those who weren't familiar with the history, if we're bringing that back, analysis of potential uses, what do you think? Is it park? Is it commercial?
Oh, it's absolutely some version of mixed use or commercial that's out there. Yeah.
Thank you. Please continue. Sorry.
And then, since everybody's talking about Santiago and Inez, I'll share. I think this site would lend itself well to some form of workforce housing too, considering it's a 7+ acre, Yeah, I know. Everybody, you know what? I'm tired of being, worried about the community getting upset. It's a vacant parcel. It's listed as residential, and everybody always looks at us like, oh, they're going to get sued and blah, blah, blah. We've been sued by them on everything we've done, including a helicopter pad to save people's lives. I'm over it, right? I'm sorry, but it's an important piece of property for the city. Now, whether it goes to passive use for a park, I think that's a wonderful concept, right? I'm not discounting it, but I'd also say that we have very few opportunities in this community to, do a meaningful project led by the city that deals with workforce housing, right? Housing that can provide, affordable means for our community to enter into property ownership. Our teachers, our resident doctors, our firefighters, our police officers, that sort of thing. And if the community is opposed to having a teacher living next door to them, then they've got other problems to deal with. But, you know, I really think that's an important piece of property, and I think we need to not worry as much about, you know, because look, if we went to just surplus that land could go through that, you know, CEQA exemption project to become high density, you know, affordable property. And there's a lot of legislation pushing more and more properties like that are municipal owned to take away local authority. So if we don't do something with that property, it's going to get done for us at some point, right? So either we fight back against all the loss of local control, or we start to program those properties for something beneficial. I like Stu's idea of the, you know, demonstration site, museum, and all of that too. I really think we just need to do something there, because I don't imagine anybody who drives past a big dirt lot constantly isn't looking at that property saying, can we just do something with it, you know, at some level? That would be great. And then the other one is just the South Temecula Parkway interchange area there. That's a big chunk of land. Most of it's probably not usable. But if we are looking for something along training, so going back to, you know, one of my other principles was public safety. You know, I think the city really needs to start looking at how do we bump our ISO rating up to, you know, 3.5 or 4. And having a tower and a training facility out there would certainly help along the way, you know, quite a bit. So, you know, I don't know what the potential is out there for, you know, maybe a larger conversation on all of that and utilize. It's a tough property to use, and especially once the interchange went in, it's constrained even further. So, but it still has a lot of potential there.
Okay, good.
So I have a quick question, if I can, real quick, and this is just out to the council themselves. I know two of the things that Mayor Matt Ron and Stu that you guys brought up is the fact that, you know, we were looking, you guys were really adamant about the pool, and we were adamant also of the theater as well. Where, and if so, because those were just hot topics the last few months, would we potentially, I guess, want to place something like that? Because Stu, you know, like that pool is going to be huge. So if that's something that's really important, where do you foresee, if so, if we can, even putting that in here? What would that look like? Anyone?
I'm still trying to figure that out too. And we're still kind of, at a subcommittee level, we're trying to kind of identify. That's why I've got a lot of holds on my sheet.
Okay.
Because we're under no pressure to sell anything.
Right.
Or get rid of anything. So I come from the water district mentality of buy land and hold it forever. And so, because you never know and you can never replace it. So that's kind of like my mentality when I deal with surplus property. As far as I'm concerned, there is no such thing as surplus property. So, and the only reason why I would sell Diaz is just because of the extreme value, and we could utilize that money in Uptown Jefferson and push that project a lot farther along than it's going to naturally, because cash is going to be the lifeblood of moving Uptown Jefferson to what we have envisioned. So.
Okay.
Councilmember Alexander, I just want to I had a hard time hearing your question too. You were asking about the aquatic center pool? Okay.
Yeah. So like an Olympic-sized pool, because I know those were the two things that were brought up recently, was the theater and the aquatic. So if that's something that's, you know, on your guys' minds and hearts to be able to facilitate, this is like the ideal time to.
It is. I think the Performing Arts Center is, you know, it's still on my mind. I know Stu sits on that subcommittee with me. We've been talking about it. I don't think any of these parcels lend themselves to that
that's what I was wondering.
So that's why I didn't bring it up. I just don't think it's here.
Okay. No, that's what I wanted to know as well, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. So just to check in on, yeah, please, Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to add something really quick, because when, you know, I had initially asked, you know, how much the Diaz property we thought was worth at the onset of this conversation, and I want to say some of the projects we've done recently with affordable housing, we're spending a significant amount of money per unit, $500-ish thousand a unit. That's probably a little bit high.
No, that's fair. That's way high. So yeah, no, it's been the 100 to 250 range.
Okay, so 100 to 250, we're talking like And if that property is worth 40 million, we're potentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tantalizing to sell it, right? Because you hear this large number, but the reality is maybe it's not going to be a huge, huge hole. And I really want to clarify, I do think that is not the best spot for housing, unless you did some mixed use, but I think that's way down the road, which is why, to Stu's point, the whole hold mentality for me is important, but what is that, interim 20 to 30 year use kind of thing for that property. So that was just where I landed with that. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. We are at a pause point, but just I do want to check in with all 5 of you. Any other burning ideas or questions you want to get out at the moment before we head to the break? We're obviously going to come back and pick up with you. But good. Sounds like great timing. So perfect amount of input for now, keeping us on schedule. So thank you very much. Pending anything else, I think Mayor, I'll defer to you to confirm, but I think we'll head into a break to reconvene at 10:50, I think was what staff wanted to suggest, if okay with all of you, and we'll pick it up again from there. Very good. Thank you. We'll break until then.
All right. If we could grab our seats here, I apologize that that took a little longer than we expected. When the congressman's speaking, you listen. And sorry about that, apologize. So we're back, and we are now moving into the public comment. Is that right? Or
we'll do a
little bit
of wrap
more
up.
summary, wrap up?
Yeah,
Okay,
and
thank
then
you.
We'll go to public. Thank you very much. All right, welcome back. Thanks, everybody. So good. So what we wanted to do with our remaining time is briefly check in. Just did a little debriefing with staff during the break, and a lot of great, constructive, clear feedback from all of you about your interest in these potential sites. And so what we've done here, we want to just briefly summarize what we've heard from you at this point. Make sure we haven't misunderstood or misinterpreted or left anything behind as to how we'll continue to move forward. And I think, as you all know, but just to be clear for everybody's benefit, this is start of a longer process. This isn't kind of speak now, forever hold your peace today, and that's it. There's going to be an iterative process coming down the line of review of new data, analysis, and evaluation. So plenty more discussion to come about these sites and what you may or may not prefer to see with more data in hand in the coming weeks and months. So I wanted to remind about that. So overall, this is a significant list of sites that you've kind of helped to kind of rise to the top here overall. So based on your ideas overall, before we go over these, I want to be clear and we'll remind these sites will be kind of divvied out to their respective subcommittees, depending upon kind of what seems to be emerging potential uses. So that'll be done by staff, and that's where more of the deep dive with staff support and analysis will occur, and again, working with you then back at the council level. So briefly, hopefully I haven't done enough justice to that. But as is noted, there's many steps along the way to come, and from this workshop, there will be an after-action memo provided by staff, again, just as another check-in with you in the near term, just to make sure details aren't lost. So with that, just want to briefly recap, and let you all chime in and let us know on some things we've heard today. So first of all, the Diaz property, and I'm going through these kind of in no specific priority order, just kind of as they're oriented as you see them on screen, and is noted on the page here. But Diaz, obviously, a lot of the site has a lot of potential, either from a potential, sale of revenue source, sports, recreation opportunities, housing, municipal, industrial sites. So perhaps nothing new to all of you, right, in terms of knowing over the years about the opportunities, but this is the time now. It sounds like this is a site you want to elevate and ask staff to take that deep dive to really start to gather that data overall. And so, as I just mentioned, some of those uses, not to lose the potential for housing, either at that site or potentially relocating potential affordable housing from that site to a different location. So those are some of the details we picked up from you about the opportunities around that site. The Mcnagar Park, the connectivity opportunities from that site based on where it is and those surrounding uses, and identified as a missing link, if you will, in your Trails Master Planning. Sounds like you're all many of you are very interested in seeing that deeper analysis taken on, but also for the value of expanding the park overall and really providing some opportunities to improve safety in the area, potentially strengthen parking opportunities for nearby uses, and overall really a missing link in that broader community overall. And then let's see, we'll go to the Main Street Mercedes location. Again, perhaps mixed-use commercial. It's something you've all, the City Council has considered in the past. It's time to bring that back now and look at that closely, and staff will take that forward in that vein. And then, let's see, South Temecula Parkway, the interchange area, potentially for a training facility. This may, I know the mayor noted, this could be kind of a site-specific that can really help boost that ISO rating. That's a key target for all of you, a priority. Knowing that nevertheless there are significant constraints there, so it'll have to be a pretty close analysis for what's within the realm of feasibility related to those constraints. Santiagones, of course, again, a lot of different options that you all talked about here. Just to summarize, perhaps more passive recreation, light use, historic home location site, community garden, perhaps expanded parking opportunities, perhaps part of it, all or part of it for housing, and whether that's done, there was a note, that could be done more among your control as a local authority, or potentially in the future, if it did assume more of state control, it could be done in that way as well. So wanting to really flesh out those options and explore those and understand the ramifications and implications of each, but also wanted to acknowledge too that the immediate neighbors, not the least of which is the HOA, obviously have a lot of stake and interest and concern about the future use, and knowing you all want to make sure that that's, of course, part of any future process that may move forward for that site. And then let's see, just checking our list. And then last and not least is the Ronald Reagan Sports Park. Again, already identified as potentially a location for pickleball courts, for example. There could be, there's anticipation there could be parking issues based on existing uses and bringing more folks there. So we'll asking staff to really parse that out closely and do the best kind of evaluation possible around those lines. So wanted to just kind of verify that with you, that these are the 6 that we've heard here from you today, and ask that I'm going to check in with each of you and just to see, do we miss any specifics that you don't see reflected on the board or that weren't talked clearly or that I may have misconstrued in my quick summary. So yeah, Councilmember Stewart, please.
So as I was thinking, because Zach and I are on the subcommittee for the pickleball placement.
Right.
And I was thinking about the Mcnagar Park all of a sudden, because if we do expand to the other side of the creek, is there enough room to even put it there? Because the pickleball community is very centrally located, and they love that park because that's where they wanted us to build the pickleball facility. And I'm thinking, well, if we expand on the other side, add enough parking, that might be also a nice alternate site if we had the room. I don't even know.
Okay, good. Thank you. And this is absolutely, and this helps to just kind of flesh out what you want to make sure staff looks at closely as we start to dive deeper. So very good. Yeah, Mayor, did you want to?
Just to get some consensus on all the other parcels, I know we wanted to tick off the priority ones, but just to kind of circle around the rest of those, my sense was on like the Jefferson Avenue Uptown sliver that's up there. I think that's a good one just to hold on to because we don't have any plans for it right now. So let's just hold it. But then I've got a list of like 5 sites here that are just sitting vacant, and we tossed around some ideas, and these aren't huge projects, but it'd be nice to have them be something other than just a dirt lot. Especially if we're not contemplating anything over the next decade, say, is there a temporary something we could place on it that would make it a little bit more, useful or scenic? And that would be the section on Harveston. That's a tough property to work with generally. I don't know what else we would do with it besides community park type thing. Rorapaw Ranch, that one kind of is just a, no-fly zone pretty much, but it would be nice, especially as that community is built out, to have that as some sort of, passive open space type property. The property near Rancho Elementary, I have no idea what we do with that one. That's a tough one generally, so maybe it just gets spruced up a bit for vegetation or something. The property on Pachanga Parkway there, that weird little triangle type sliver, again, any one of these sites, I mean, since we have the Adopt a Park programs, and we've talked about demonstration gardens with Rancho, we've talked about all, any one of these sites or multiples of these could fulfill that, but maybe reaching out to the adjacent homeowners associations and all that to say, hey, what would you like to see benefit community garden, demonstration garden, whatever, just to kind of fill those in a little bit over the next couple of years. And then the only other one is that we talked about but didn't circle back on is the Santiago Pujol property, and it would just be nice to confirm that Flood would let us do something on the back end of their property, and maybe contemplate, if that's where the skate park is going, or temporary, maybe contemplate some larger, permanent use there, especially if Boys and Girls Club is going to move on that. I'm sure they'd love it. Yeah.
Right. Good. So thank you, Mayor, for going through those. And just to check in, I saw a lot of heads nodding, but just, so it sounds like, let me suggest, sounds like those are kind of smaller scale in terms of asking staff and their level of effort. And so it's kind of, maybe, as you said, engage those local stakeholders. Look at, is there some relatively, I'll use the term easy enhancements that might be used, maybe temporary uses that we're not thinking of. And the things, and more specifically, you gave the example, the last example was Santiago, working with the district around that. Is it just to check in with the rest of you? Does that kind of make sense to you? Did you want to offer anything else specific on those sites?
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. I'm glad you brought that up because we have this list, and in preparation for this, I'm thinking of all the conversations we've had over the last little bit about some of these. So the Margarita Road Harvest and Way property, the skate community has reached out, and that's a great infill recreation opportunity. Rory Ranch, the trails out there, we really need to make that happen. I think that is a huge amenity out there. And I'm hearing from some of the residents within Somers Bend, some of the cross-country kids that are running out there. They're doing work out there, so it's looking like it's finishing, right? And so people are saying, oh, when is that going to open? When is that going to open? So that's great. La Serena, another sort of outdoor, extreme sports, sort of infill amenity. Pump track was talked about, a downhill dirt jump, because there is a lot of topo, a lot of downhill. There was talking about some of that, those opportunities there. Obviously, the infill skate project at Pujol and Santiago. And then, I think a demonstration garden over on Capino Lane makes huge sense. And if you'll all recall, well, I know you all recall, we added in to our budget an infill recreation sort of placeholder. So we have opportunities to leverage those funds for some of these things that are sort of been on our radar for a while. And I would sort of say that, as we look at these lots, the highest and best use is not just a dirt lot. So we need to move on some of these, even if that's just an interim, 15, 20 year sort of placeholder. But it certainly would elevate many parts of our community from what the current use is right now.
Thank you. Good. Any other thoughts along those lines about kind of those other sites? We have kind of a top 6 at the moment we're calling, and those additional sites, and making sure staff aren't going to just kind of say, well, we'll put those away for a few years and come back, but still be thoughtful about more interim uses and, again, enhancements. Maybe a little bit more analysis if we're looking at some more specific infrastructure for any of these sites, maybe at least a little bit of an indication, if possible, about what that might require to take. So, okay, good. Any other thoughts here about what we've laid out? Any back to kind of the top 6, if you will, that we've summarized here for you? Anything else you want to make sure staff, as they start to get into analysis and evaluating, any other particulars you'd like to ask them to make sure they're studying or aware of with those? Mayor, please.
I would just like to reach back out to Pat and Erica, Kevin, Aaron, others, on Luke. Are we missing anything that that we haven't mentioned that you think? You're the experts. You're dealing with this 110%. So, is there anything we're missing in the conversation?
I'll start. I don't think you're missing anything. I think what we try to do is when we look at everything that's already planned for the next 60 months, in terms of dollars and cents, and what we hear from the community, what we, holes that we have in our community, needs that we're hearing that need to be met. I think you guys touched on everything that I can think of, and certainly, the outdoor recreation investments, the attainable housing and affordable housing, those are big. Infrastructure is kind of a separate conversation. We didn't get into a lot of that today, but as you guys know, we're investing millions in infrastructure, and we don't necessarily need a lot of right-of-way, Pat. I think we've been very active in securing that for projects like French Valley Parkway Phase 2 and things like that. So I think you're on the right track, but Kevin, Erica, Pat, Luke, if you want to weigh in.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to mention, and this was touched on a little bit, but we did include in our budget we call it the Uptown Sports Park, the soccer facility or recreation facility in the flood control district detention basin. I think that's why it wasn't on the list, because it's owned by the flood control district. But we have been working cooperatively with them to be able to try to advance that project, and we did include some funding in our budget. We've been pursuing other state and federal funds. We do have enough money to actually get started with some, real design and potentially look at phasing that if we don't have all the funding at one time, to be able to build it in phases and at least get something started so we can add some of those potential soccer amenities at that location also.
Can I ask on that facility, and maybe this is an Army Corps and flood question too, but developing on site anything isn't allowed because it's the, detention basin and flood overflow, right?
That property, the recreational use in that property is was designated as part of the Marietta Creek project. So that is a anticipated use for that property.
But I'm thinking like, commercial or residential, not allowed. But let me ask you this, because I know the answer is no. If you put that on a pier above that flood and had it jet out into a recreational space that didn't interfere with hydrology, is that allowed?
Well, there was a concept to put a transit center on that property way back when, and that was eliminated for consideration because that was going to take away from the detention capacity of the property. What other potential creative uses out there may be, I couldn't absolutely say no, but I would say probably discouraged by flood control.
Sure, but not. We'll get creative with it. Okay, that's all I needed to hear. That's all I needed to hear.
That was probably a good call.
All right.
Go ahead.
No, just Mr. Mayor, one thing that didn't come up, but oftentimes can come up, not through this process, but through the economic development process through staff. There's a handful of these properties that might be attractive to private enterprise, and they'll come in and they'll express interest for a certain amount of acreage. What does the city own, type thing, and on occasion, we field those, and then those go through the proper channels. And if there is going to be now with the new law, obviously we got to jump through a lot more hoops to entertain that. But on occasion, and we have a very aggressive economic development effort, there can be projects that might be viable on a handful of these properties other than municipal uses too. But we'll take that into consideration, take it as it comes too. Luke, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, just the one item that I didn't see get kind of discussed as much as I thought it would was just the Town Square Marketplace and those sites. It's such a special site, and we've gone out for RFP on that twice now, and it's been going all the way back to 2007. Just what exactly is the vision there, and what do we do with it? Are the economics right for anything that we've been thinking about in the past? Is there an interim use for the site? Right now it's being used as parking, and it's actually a really great use. It's been really great. But is there something else? There's the idea of turning it into an expansion in a temporary status of the Town Square Park. So making that actually a bigger park idea. So that's something that I think would be great to at least look at, if that's okay with the council, along with the RFP process as well. Engage Kaiser Marston to do more market analysis to tell us, what is actually feasible out there, and what isn't. I think as the Altair project builds out, I think the landscape changes for what is feasible there with that infusion. But that's going to be some time. It's going to be, probably 10 years before it's completely done. So what happens in between there? Maybe it just stays a parking lot, but maybe there's something else that could happen there as well.
So, Mr. Mayor, I am not in any rush to develop those parcels. They're critical for Old Town. Number one, they're right in front of City Hall, so I'm happy to let those sit there and go to a more minor use or a use that can be reversed in the meantime. I don't mind having parking there.
Real quick, I have to agree for sure with Mary Ann, because it gives our people access to Old Town for right now until we can really figure out what we want to put there. I think it's a definite hold. I don't even know would it be even worth it to put, just make it more defined so it's not dirt, more concrete or whatever we want to put down. So that way it just maybe looks a little nicer sitting in front of our city hall too. Sure. That would probably be one thing if we were going to keep it. I'd like to be able to just not have a dirt lot sit in front. So.
Good. I do concur with the other two also, because I think we're entering into another economic situation that we could throw an RFP out there, and we probably will, but financing is now a huge issue. And with Altair probably going to be developed out in the next 5 years, it's at least going to start. It's going to generate a whole new level of interest in Old Town again. And hopefully we're through that hump that we're getting ready to pass through. And so, I too am in favor of just leaving it parking for now, because it releases the pressure and the strain on the parking space availability in Old Town right now. And so, I'm very much in favor. Let's just sit on this, because you're right. These are like the crown jewels of our hat right now. And so I don't want to have it go just to have it go. I'd rather just sit on it, let it stew, pardon the pun, a little bit, and right, and just let's kind of see what happens.
Mr. Mayor, just hearing from the council has just been instructive. It was pointed out that a lot of you have sat through these subcommittees, and a lot of uses or ideas have been thrown around, right? But always pointing towards, let's see what happens at the workshop too. I'm glad you brought up the aquatics facility as well as the performing arts, because really we kind of just been sitting on that until we heard directly from you. And that's going to provide some guidance kind of moving forward. The other thing too, what's also been good, is to hear about some interim uses as well as infill and things like that. The lots in front of the Civic Center right here, Town Square, those things have been pointed out as part of the master plan, just in terms of interim uses. And so we've had consultants who have come in and basically discuss, possible uses as pop-up parks and things like that. Erica, I know you're familiar with that too. But the mere fact that we're hearing in one setting from the council, move forward on this, maybe hold on this, or here's kind of what we're thinking, allows us some direction in there, and I know that's something that you wanted to get out of this, so thank you for taking the time today. Appreciate it.
Okay. Very good.
If I could just add, Mr. Mayor, thank you for asking for the staff input on this. We really appreciate that. It's fantastic to hear this flexible and creative approach to addressing land use. I think it's really, really exciting for our community. As you all know, we're extremely blessed with the amount of parks and facilities we have, but we also have a very, very passionate community, with a lot of people with a lot of different interests. And I think just more addressing the public and asking everyone to remember that all of this is a process of compromise, and we always look for the highest, best, and ideally most flexible use for this land. And I think as we continue with this process, we're going to see maybe some new uses that hadn't even been on the radar before. So from the standpoint of just addressing the community and saying, you know, engage, continue to advocate, continue to be part of the process, also understand that any land use decision is a compromise. And, you know, there's always opportunities to try and meet multiple needs whenever we can.
Very good. And I would just say one last thing on Marketplace out here, just to follow up. I agree. I think we need to be real perspective about what happens with that property. But I don't know what the harm would be. Like you said, the KMA study, you know, getting some of that done, figuring out what the market might look like, making some projections, because it's going to take a while anyway. So if you start the process now, you're probably 4 or 5 years out before anything really happens anyway. And if we're going to take that time and find somebody that we're truly able to work with in that process, find the right partner, find the right patients, and find the right project, you know, I don't mind seeing it go to temporary, you know, parking and all that. I think that's a great, you know, use for now. But I'd love to see at least us moving forward in some way now rather than saying 5 years from now, because then we're 10 years out, right? So, you know, I would just hate to see it sit for a decade in front, because just economically, again, my big concern is just as we start to see a new Costco or two built around the region and, you know, another Home Depot up in Murrieta and all of that, our tax revenue is going to start to be whittled away because of that. And if we don't start to think about what to backfill, we have few opportunities on the council side to actually direct our own development, right? Not just wait for somebody to do it. And so if we, you know, I think we need to take the opportunity and really push it forward and make sure we're filling in the gaps with the right kind of base, I think, and right kind of project for City Hall.
I'd support a study. I support a Kaiser Marston study. They've always been really good for us.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Glad we were able to fill in a little bit on outside the technical surplus, but I know staff appreciate some comments from you on these additional properties. Is good. So that's very helpful. Thank you. I think with that, let me propose, I think we've covered everything we wanted to cover with you in the context of the surplus lands and city-owned properties. For now, we have the direction. Hopefully the summary I've provided you covers that. Again, there will be a follow-up memo from staff just to kind of verify, you know, what we've heard from you today and how they'll start to move forward. And again, much more to come, of course, overall through subcommittees, through you. We're starting to look at opportunities in a little more detail with data, some analysis to start to explore these more closely. So with that, I think what I can do is thank you for having me. I was honored to be part of this with you and to support you. But I think I can turn back to you, Mayor, to go move to public comment.
Yes, please. Can we have our first public speaker?
Yes, we do have 5 public comments, and we're going to ask the speakers to go ahead and come up to the podium and provide their public comments. Each speaker has 5 minutes because it is a business item. First speaker is Laurel Lamont, to be followed by Tammy Marine.
Hi, my name's Laura Lamont, and I represent Upward Community. I'm an advocate for attainable home ownership. So I bring a face to the faceless, a voice to the voiceless. We've talked about fire, police, teachers, but we do see those community members. We don't generally see the community that serves the community. So like the grocers, your barbers, every building you pass is a lesser income employee who cannot afford to reside within the community we serve. All across the nation, businesses are unionizing because we're burnout. We're tired. We're tired of feeling unseen and not incorporated into the communities we serve. I work for Trader Joe's, and I advocate for attainable homeownership and all of the workforce that works to serve the community. All of these companies deserve a seat at the table. So we talk about money, $40 million. I think that's a starting point. I've always said that there's plenty of money. We just need to seek it out. It's time to bring Trader Joe's to the table. It's time to bring Costco to the table. It's time to bring Target to the table and Starbucks and whatever else that we want to have in accessibility to our community. Because if they care about their employees, which I know they do, then they're going to be willing to talk about housing and how they can contribute to their employees being a part of the community. We need to bring the smaller businesses, the very popular 1909, Eat, Press, Public House, whatever it is, bring them to the table. What do their employees need? Can their employees afford to live here? What is it they're lacking? And have we done a survey of the employment of Old Town? Would they live in Old Town if they could live in Old Town? These are things that we need to talk about when we talk about the leftover land and vacant lots. I feel like we are an afterthought because there's not a lot left, and we haven't been considered. So let's consider us attainable home ownership for the local economic workforce. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. The next speaker is Tammy Marine.
Hi, I'm Tammy Marine, Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity Inland Valley. As a reminder for those that don't know, Habitat is a nonprofit affordable housing developer, but we specialize in self-help homeownership, so it's not a rental program. So a couple points I wanted to make. One is I just came off, had the honor of serving on the Quality of Life Master Plan Blue Ribbon Committee, and one of the things during the meeting that we talked about repetitively, not just from me representing housing, but other representatives from different sectors, is we talked about the need for affordable housing and why that is so critical to us. So I just wanted to remind you that, like many of you, I moved to Temecula because housing was more affordable here, and we were looking for home ownership, not rental opportunities, and that scenario has now shifted, and there are very few affordable homeownership opportunities anymore. So I think that is just a point I wanted to make moving forward. I also, looking at the parcels that you provide, I noticed that most of them are not conducive for housing, but a few of them are. So I would encourage the council to really look at the ones that are and maybe consider incorporating homeownership or affordable housing of some type into some of those units. And I also am a Temecula Valley Chamber member and serve on the Workforce Development Committee for the Chamber. One of the concerns that corporations have in our town is affordability for their employees, and that the majority of, I'm told 65 to 70%, that's not an exact number, but I'm told that from a person that is from the industrial center. They commute, and that's a huge issue because we know that commuting affects traffic, the environment, safety, and a family's ability to thrive. So looking at those workforce homeownership opportunities, I think, is essential, not just for the individuals that move into that house, but also for economic development so that corporations want to come here and be a part of our community. In terms of the specific parcels, I just wanted to mention that the Diaz property, again, this is a question and a comment. I just wondered if that parcel could possibly be subdivided and sell half and maybe use the other half for workforce development, something like that. The other thing I wanted to mention was the Santiago and Yanez property. I know there are issues with the HOA. I feel Habitat for Humanity might be a candidate for that because I think that we could produce a beautiful product of single-family homes that might dovetail well into that HOA. I am reminded from my construction managers who's here that those lots would be probably a little larger than what we typically do with Habitat homes, but nonetheless, we're interested in that. And then on the Devana property, which was, I think, property 13, I think I'm saying that right, I know there was a proposed senior unit project in the past. That is a huge topic at Habitat, is trying to figure out how we can house our seniors in a homeownership model, and we're definitely interested in that. And last topic I just wanted to make while I had the forum is that there are Habitat affiliates all across the country, particularly in the state, that are partnering with affordable rental developers. We would love to be a part of some of those conversations if it comes up, because affordable homeownership helps people change the trajectory of their life long term, not just temporarily. It's not just a Band-Aid. And I think that's the values we represent here as a city, is to help people to thrive. And so I'd love to be a part of those conversations if the opportunity comes about, and I just thank you for the time.
Thank you, Tammy. The next speaker is Adam Ruiz.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for hosting this workshop. This has been very educational and informative as well. Just wanted to make a real quick comment on the pit. I know there's been some discussion about pickleball courts over there, and while I do realize that pickleball is, you know, kind of the big new craze and everyone's going after it, I would be concerned taking away soccer field space and other field space. I've coached in the Valley for many years. I'd have to probably check in with James and Sergio again to see how much impact Somers Bend fields have had and how much relief there's been. But I've always been under the impression that there's not enough field space for the existing teams that we have, let alone for the expansion of some of these soccer teams. And I think taking a field that, according to the slide even, is still heavily utilized, taking that field away to then put something new that could possibly go somewhere else should really be considered. If that wasn't being used and it was just kind of an open park, then I could see that maybe being a better home for it. But knowing how short we have been on field space, I think that would have a very negative impact on especially those youth kids that utilize that park. It's already working the way it is, and I would just encourage you to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. The next speaker is Shalon Garcia.
Hi, my name is Shalon Garcia, and I'm with Link Housing. We're an affordable housing developer that's been around for approximately 39 years. We do multifamily rental housing, a little bit different than what Tammy described earlier. Big fan of Habitat for Humanity, by the way. But our primary goal is really for like I guess you would consider it like the first stop for housing before people are ready to transition into ownership. And the purpose for me coming today is because we do have interest in the city and wanting to do multifamily rental, affordable housing in the city of Temecula. And I don't know if there are questions or comments, but I'll jump right in. I appreciate MIG for sharing or having the presentation or the portion on the Surplus Land Act. So my question is, would you guys actually be open or in consideration of actually exempting the lands that are for housing sites to help move that initiative forward, because HCD does actually have exemptions in their guidelines for exempting those sites to go forward to I guess forego the RFP process. So that was one of my questions for you guys. The second question is that if you do put out RFPs for each of these sites, I heard the gentleman mention earlier that one of the sites, the industrial, you might want to hold on because of the market conditions. But for the sites that are specifically earmarked for workforce housing or for affordable housing, what would the timeline look like to get the RFPs out? Is it something that would happen before the end of this year? Like, what's the priority to see something like that happen or move forward? Especially with the funding cycles at the state level constantly changing. And I think that's it. But I want to thank you guys for hosting this today. It's been amazing. Love the quality plan that you guys did for the city. I thought that was awesome. And I appreciate you guys having us here.
Thank you, Shalon. And our last speaker is Lene Turley-Treo.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for this workshop. It's been really informative and helped us to kind of see. And I love the video. Wow. Was that so cool to really be able to see that? So thank you to IT and our guy here who's done a lot of work on this. So a couple of comments. I am a pickleball player. And there doesn't seem to be anyone else here representing that group, and so I'm going to stand up and speak a little bit on that. And there were 3 projects, or 3 land parcels that I was looking at. And number 1, I think that was talked about, was the pit. And I think for me, that's probably number 1 because of saving time and money. It's there. The lights are already there. They would have to put restrooms there. But there's an area there that has storage that could maybe be relocated where parking could be put there. And I think we could possibly get 16 courts in there. We're actually holding tournaments in another facility in another city right now, and with 16 courts, we can run tournaments for 200 people. And so it's not only an amenity, but it could possibly be something where the city could bring in some income with if they were to hold tournaments there. So that's kind of number 1. And I know that there is a soccer field there. My boys played on that field. But it is 1 soccer field, and I know we're going to be building some more soccer fields in the hopefully near future in the north end of town, like I think 16 new fields. So that's the first one. Number 2 would be Mcnagar Park, which I think for that to work, the courts would all have to be moved to one area, and then those courts that are there right now be changed to tennis courts, which would help, the tennis community, which I'm also part of. And so that's a possibility that would take, I think, more time and money to make happen, but so that's why that's number 2 for me. Number 3 is the Diaz property that I know Council Member Schwank and Council Member Alexander talked about in doing a sports complex. That would be amazing, because that would be all kinds of sports there, and we don't have anything like that in the city. So that would also add, attract people for our tourism. We are a destination city with Old Town, the wineries. That would be another reason for people to come and be part of the city. And it's a little ways out, so we're not near any residential areas. So that would be an awesome area too. So those are kind of the 3 land parcels that we were looking at as far as pickleball. And, I'm all about getting people active in this community, whether it's biking, whatever it is. And I think that that helps our community be healthier, which is one of our big goals for QLMP, is to have a healthy, livable, sustainable community. So thank you.
Thank you, Lene. Mr. Mayor, that completes public comments.
All right. Well, it is just past noon. Appreciate everybody coming out today, having a great discussion, and look forward to seeing this all move forward. Thank you for all of your hard work here today. And I guess that's it. Bye.